Back in December in my channel update, I promised that I would squeeze sometime early in the year a review on the Theatrical Edition version of Evangelion. Back then, we all thought that the film was going to be released on the 23rd of January. That is 3+1. Well, a couple of weeks has passed since that date and still no movie. So for now we have to rewatch the first 3 films if we want to satisfy our rebuild thirst. And rewatch I did. The purpose of this video is to evaluate the films individually, as films. And as 2 of them are sequels and the 3 of them are based on an older story, I will be taking that into consideration as well. Just as I do with my anime review section of the channel, where I rate anime adaptations. Also, I will be providing each movie with a rating. Obviously, spoilers ahead. Are you ready? Let's begin. In 2007, the first theatrical edition of Rebuild of Evangelion was released. Ho! Or You Are Not Alone. This first movie is basically a shot-by-shot remake of the original first 6 episodes of Neon Genesis Evangelion with some differences. The movie starts just as the original story, with an angel attack. Back then, the 3rd one. Now, the 4th one, invading Tokyo 3 with the military trying to stop it. Shinji arrives to the city, sees Rei for the first time in a vision, just like in the original story. We know that this is Rei from the future that has the ability to travel through time and space, and some in the fandom calls her Rei Quantum. I already made a video about this months ago, in my Rei video where I go over more in depth. You can find that video in the description section down below. I don't like that term, Rei Quantum, because I am a big Fallout guy, and on that story everything that is overpowerful gets a quantum in the name to the point that is silly, like Nuka Quantum Grenade, Legendary Quantum Paint Job, and Quantum Donuts. Donuts. The story progresses as expected. Misato's bot, Shinji cries, Shinji goes into EVA Unit 1, Shinji destroys the angel formerly known as Sakiel, Misato's bot, Shinji cries, Shinji injures Toji's sister, Shinji gets punched, Shinji picks on Rei's bot, Shinji destroys another angel, Shinji cries, the movie ends. Oh Evangelion, what a refined masterpiece. The big reveal of the movie is obviously when Misato takes Shinji to the dogma, where we do not know what is happening, as this was not exactly on how it was established in the original story. We found out that Misato at this point, very early, knows about the giants in the depths of NERV's headquarters, and she knows precisely who it is, not Adam, but Lilith. This scene is as impactful as in the original story, but for different reasons. On the original story, Misato, who at that point had a very well developed arc, and we understood her motivations, is led to believe that she was facing the murderer of her father, the origins of her obsessions. But in the theatrical version, Lilith in this context is used merely as a plot device to motivate Shinji before Operation Yashima, and also as the key moment in which Misato and Shinji relationship strengthened. They solidified their connection for the first time in this story. In my opinion, the Lilith scene was not as strong as in the original story, which is a big reveal on the final episodes. In Rebuild, it was something that they threw in to speed up the story, and that makes it weak. The moment in the original story that both Misato and Shinji connect was that awkward long quiet scene. After that, the relationship between Shinji and Misato became unbreakable. The story regarding the rest of the cast's character development during this time frame is basically the same. Rei is still enigmatic, Gendo is still an ass, and Dr. Akagi is still the voice of reason, although she did heavily suggest that Misato should sleep with Shinji, and not as a joke like in the original story. The pacing of the movie is key, as there is no second wasted. Every single frame is used for a purpose. The music is on point, and the character redesign and animation upgrades are perfect, just perfect. This is something that will hold throughout all of the movies. The first movie is a true love letter to old school EVA fans, and an excellent introduction to the story for new ones. That is why I rate Evangelion Ho, You Are Not Alone with a 9 out of 10. cannot be lower than that just because it's basically a shot-by-shot remake to the original story, and the original story will always be a 10. The reason why it loses a point is because it feels a bit rushed, which makes sense as they had to put 6 episodes in a movie format. And as I said, Misato-Shinji's relationship is not as polished and developed as in the original story. The second movie, Ha, or You Cannot Advance, suffers more problems than the prequel. So let's begin from the top. The first problem with the first movie going into the second one is that fans were led to believe that the Rebuild story was going to be a retelling on the original one, with some twists here and there and a brand new ending. So if you went into the film as I did, you were expecting that the story will start as a remake of episode 7, followed by 8 and 9. No such thing happened, and you see, for me, that was a problem, because those episodes are among my favorite ones on the TV story. Episode 7 is the one that we are introduced to the Jet Alone, which for some reason became a fan favorite robot. Now this episode is a Misato episode, and Anno used it to develop the character more in depth, as I already expressed on my Misato vs. Plane series. In this story, we are introduced to the most warrior-like Misato. She takes the situation under control. The storytelling, which put Misato in the middle of a bunch of guys, is used to prove that she's a woman in a man's world. Not to mention the humiliation that she and Ritsuko have to go through at the beginning of the story. Misato mythos is developed impeccably. Now we can argue all you want about the whole concept behind the Jet Alone, if it was a good idea or not, but the main reason of its existence in the story is to make Misato look good. That's it. If there is a reintroduction to the Jet Alone in the Rebuild story, it has to serve the same purpose, on my opinion. This episode is removed altogether from Rebuild 2. There is no Jet Alone, therefore Misato's character development suffers. This is a big flaw in the storytelling and her arc. Furthermore, Asuka's introduction to the story also suffers from similar reasons. In episodes 8 and 9, we are introduced to a self-driven hero that will hit a wall pretty quick, and finds out that she is not as good as she believes without teamwork. And although Evangelion Unit 2 is the most powerful Evangelion unit at that point of the story, she still has a long journey ahead that will take her to a depression, and thus, her downfall. Here in the second movie, Asuka is mentally stronger. She defeats the silly-looking angel by herself, with no help whatsoever. She's already at her peak. So, that leads to the question on why these 3 main characters are really put to live together. The whole motivation behind it in the TV story was to make Shinji and Asuka synchronize to defeat an angel, to improve in their teamwork skill. Now, there is no reason other than to make the story feel like the original one. This is a flaw in the argument. Anno is relying on fan nostalgia to justify the motives. Why should he polish Asuka and Misato's arc if the fandom already knows it, right? Okay, that might be a valid point. The problem is that this new edition is a new story with new characters, and the author is not developing those arcs. He's establishing the old ones in the new one with discretionary differences, like the change of Asuka's name, which means that even though he is relying on fan memories, he keeps the right to change the character motivations anytime he wants, as they are in fact different characters. That is cheap. But you want to know what is better than to have 2 already perfect female characters in the story? Well, add a 3rd perfect female character to the story, and that is Mari, who is not part of the original story, which means that she would need to have some character development, right? Well, no. She's perfect, she's there, you're gonna like her, and that is all you need to know. That means that the only female character that is left is Rei. And if you are a fan of Anno's work as myself, you know by now that he was not a fan of hers. Yes, he wrote her and somehow forgot about her early on. But Rei is surprisingly good in this movie, and by far my favorite character in this story. Her connection with Shinji is more fleshed out, she stands up to Asuka, and tries to bring Gendo closer to his son. She feels more relaxed and thus more likable of a character, and fits perfectly with the story. Her final sacrifice has more meaning, and the motivations for Shinji to save her are stronger. Kaji and his interaction with the other characters is also better in my opinion. He's no longer that silly ex that makes Misato angry every time he appears. He's now treated more seriously, and his relationship with Misato is more believable. If you ever try to have a mature relationship with an ex of yours, you will be feeling identified by his portrayal. There are still feelings there obviously, but mutual respect now exists. Also, his interaction with the children when he takes them to the aquarium is very cool. He's connecting with all of them, not only with Asuka and that awkward relationship that they had in the original story, in which there are countless speculations. Kaji and Asuka do not have that kind of relationship anymore. And to be frank, the story does not need a man in his 30s having a weird thing with a 14-year-old teenager. I do, however, have some questions on why he is the one that tells Misato's background to Shinji. This is also a key part on Shinji and Misato's relationship in the original story, so it feels opportunistic, like, Kaji and Shinji are together now, let's just throw that in. That is weak. Other than that, there are other three things that makes this movie strong in my opinion. The new songs that were added push the development of the story to a whole different level. Also, the soundtrack is very immersive and epic, especially when it plays against the angels. This is flawless. The second thing that is pretty strong is the twist in which Asuka becomes the pilot for Unit 3. I have nothing against Toji, but his relationship with Shinji never reaches its peak in either the original story or in this one. Shinji has a better development with Kensuke in the original story than with Toji. But in Rebuild, none of them really gets there. Shinji-Asuka relationship, however, even though it's not as fleshed out as in the original story, is stronger. So him refusing to fight Unit 3 has a whole different meaning, and that is simply perfect, an upgrade to the original material. Finally, the ending. Now, I have to admit that the Ninth Angel, or Ceruel, how we all school fanboys calls him, or her, is one of my favorite angels, if not my favorite. If in the original story this angel was scary, in Ha is simply terrifying. His presence turns the whole movie dark. At this point, Shinji is in a shelter as he left NERV. Asuka is in a containment pod as she is recovering from the Unit 3 incident. Mari somehow enters NERV and steals Unit 2, and Rei brings the ultimate sacrifice. The whole climax of the story is flawless. Shinji watching his friend die, the angel destroying everything at his path, the music and the pacing is just masterful. So far, this is my favorite moment in the whole Rebuild continuity, and also the most memorable one. One more thing, we get a lot of bots. Misato bot, Asuka bot, Mari bot. I never thought that an angel bot would be so perfect. But it is, how would you know? This movie certifies that Anno is an ass man. With all its flaws and weak female characters development, overall it's a decent Evangelion story. Not the best, and obviously not as strong as the first one. Therefore for me, Rebuild Ha, You Cannot Advance is a 7 out of 10. Finally, we get to Rebuild Q, You Cannot Redo. This is the most controversial film of them three. Now, you might not remember this, or you were not introduced to the story back then, but when this movie was released, hell was unleashed. Most people hated this movie. A time skip, an unrecognizable story, basically brand new characters. Again, it took a while for most of the fandom to accept this movie. Even I have to admit that I still don't know if this new direction was or still is a good idea. But that does not mean that I dislike the movie. As I said before, Rebuild 2 for me had a lot of weaknesses. So when I went through this movie for the first time, I had medium to low expectations. Surprisingly, I like the movie since first time watching. And I still like it because I like the whole new approach to the story. We already have the original story and we can revisit it anytime we want. Now we have a new one. Few months back I made a video on the 5 reasons why I like Rebuild Q, so I'm not gonna go over it in depth again. I am just going to summarize it for you here. I feel that the introduction to the movie is perfect. Operation Oz is really impactful and memorable, with Asuka in space fighting and displaying her brand new eye patch. The movie starts really strong, and as the previous 2 movies, with a battle. I also like the new character designs. They feel post-apocalyptic and rough around the edges. Our heroes are darker and have new motives. Wily as a faction has a lot of potential, as this is the first time that it feels like the good guys are organized. Up to now, we only had 2 factions, Nerve and Seal, both evil in nature. But Wily feels different, a ray of hope in an uncertain future. Kaoru and Shinji relationship is the main theme on this movie. In the original TV story, Kaoru only appears in 1 episode, and instantly became a fan favorite. However, his relationship with Shinji never got to its full potential, and Anno obviously wanted to revisit that, which he did, and dedicated the whole movie to it. This is by far the strongest aspect of the film. My main complaint about this story is that we only get to see Shinji's perspective, and this is a whole new take on the storytelling. Never, ever we have, as an audience, put in that position, as we always had other stories and other perspectives. There are episodes in the original that Shinji barely made an appearance on, and in the end of Evangelion, he's almost irrelevant in the first act of the film. However, here in Q, Shinji takes almost all of the screen time, and with some exceptions, we are told the story exclusively from his perspective. Because of that, everything is confusing, as we are left in the dark just like Shinji. We do not know what happened during the time skip, we do not know what actually is Wily, or what their goals are other than fighting Nerve Zivas. We do not know what happened to Kaji. What happened to Kaji, Anno? By the end, we are as confused as Shinji is, and that was made on purpose, as so far this has been Shinji's story. This was pretty well established by the previous movie. This is not about Misato, or Asuka, or Nerve, or humanity. It's all about Shinji. I always have considered Rebuild Q to be a 7 out of 10, but because it feels like the first act of a 3-act story, I will revisit this score once we get to see 3+1. It can be lower, it can be higher. I just need to see how this story ends. I cannot end this video without answering the question if any of these movies, as standalone movies, judged by their movie aspects, like plot, tone, characters, score and pace, are any of these movies better to the end of Evangelion? In my opinion, no, they are not. But those reasons I will tell you about in a future video. Guys, thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like the video if you did, subscribe if you haven't already, yell at me on Twitter anytime you like, and as always I wish you all a wonderful day.